Left of the box. There was a swarm of tweets, a tweet storm. I think they used to be called tweet storms, of just so many media figures and politicians messaging against an attack on Mount Sinai Hospital. So we'll read the tweets that came out. This is Andrew Perez, so progressive community advocate. Oh, well, he's progressive, so so he's like me then, huh? He's like me, huh? So this person who is a progressive community advocate, as a Canadian, I'm so angry and heartbroken at the vile footage of anti-Semitic protesters infiltrating Mount Sinai Hospital to intimidate Jewish patients, physicians, and staff. I can't believe I have to say this, but Mount Sinai isn't a government ministry, nor an embassy, or an entity in any way tied to what's going on in the Middle East. It's a public hospital bearing Jewish name that serves patients of all faiths and ethnicities. So all of this is in response because there was a huge protest rally happening after Israel started to bomb Rafah during the Super Bowl. And so the next day there was this big mass protest. So ongoing acts such as these amount to pure anti-Semitism, and they're not all about Israel's actions. No, they're all about jeopardizing the safety and security of all Canadian Jews. All Canadians must condemn these actions in the strongest possible terms. Having said this, I'm quite frankly growing very tired of statements that decry these obviously dangerous acts, yet suggest nothing by the way of action. Governments and law enforcement must take concrete action to protect Canadian Jews so that they can feel safe when working at or accessing services within public institutions. That should never be too much to ask. So from the sounds of it, it was pretty bad if they were going into the hospital and targeting it specifically because it was a Jewish hospital. Then, I kind of would be against that because, back when the anti-vaxxers were having their marches and rallies, they actually did block off entrances to hospitals and prevented people from getting in. That actually did happen, and they had to pass a law to make that so that you can't do that. So, if that was actually the case, then I would kind of be like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. According to this guy, the hospital was infiltrated to intimidate Jewish patients, physicians, and staff. So they went around to the patients and they were asking, like, are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? No, 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 no. Oh, you're Jewish, so we're going to harass you. So that's kind of what it sounds like was happening. Mayor Olivia Chow, the mayor of Toronto, who people had hopes for that she would be better than the previous John Tory, she also released this. Read my statement on events outside Mount Sinai Hospital yesterday. A hospital is a sanctuary, a place of healing for all. My family has a long history of Mount Sinai. My father passed there. Both my late husband and I had cancer treatments there. Yesterday's actions at Mount Sinai Hospital, a hospital founded by Toronto's Jewish community, were unacceptable. Targeting Jewish institutions is anti-Semitic, and hate has no place in our city. So again, this hospital was targeted, apparently, in these protests. They went directly to that hospital to be like, yeah, since you're a Jewish named hospital, we're going to protest you because of what's happening in Rafah. And nobody's actually mentioning why this protest is happening. And according to the mayor, the hospital was targeted. That's what she's saying, that this Jewish named hospital was targeted. Bonnie Crombie, she's a MP for Mississauga, so, the nearby city. I've been torn up by accounts of protesters infiltrating, that's quite strong language there. They're infiltrating Mount Sinai Hospital, intimidating Jewish patients and doctors, and threatening our already weakened healthcare system. That's odd. Intimidating Jewish patients and doctors and threatening, infiltrating Mount Sinai hospitals, intimidating Jewish patients and doctors. Infiltrating Mount Sinai hospitals to intimidate Jewish patients, physicians, and staff. Infiltrating Mount Sinai Hospital to intimidate Jewish patients and doctors. Infiltrating Mount Sinai hospitals, intimidating Jewish patients and doctors. That's an odd sentence to have word for word duplicated between two people. Because infiltrating isn't exactly a commonly used word when it comes to these protests and rallies and stuff. It just seems a little odd that they would have it, worded exactly the same. Let's finish what she has to. Let's see what she has to say. So, intimidating, infiltrating, intimidating. That's they're both having the exact same account of what happened and threatening our already weakened healthcare system. These anti-Semitic actions are intentional attempts at destabilizing the safety and security of Jewish people living in Ontario. I condemn these indefensible acts and urge government to deploy resources necessary to ensure communities can be safe and welcoming to Jews and all people who call Ontario home. So again, this Liberal MP is saying that Mount Sinai was targeted, that it was specifically targeted because it is a Jewish hospital and that people within that hospital were then intimidated and threatened if they were Jewish. That is what she is saying. Chrystia Freeland, another Liberal MP. I share in shock at the shameful demonstrations that took place last night at Mount Sinai Hospital. I stand with my neighbors and the Jewish community in condemning this act of anti-Semitism. So again, just shock and horror that this Jewish hospital was targeted. Now, Doug Ford, oddly enough, didn't tweet out a message, but he was at a news conference the following day, so he made a public statement about it. So let's hear what he has to say as Premier of Ontario.
In 2013, 4 Jewish women in Toronto decided that they were tired of the anti-Semitism in the health sector, and they put together some money to start what is now Mount Sinai Hospital. It started in Yorkville, but is in the 40s went over to University Avenue, as you well know, and you've been there many times. Last night there were masked protesters, many of them calling for intifada. Also, many other incidents of anti-Semitism. They jumped on the hospital. A doctor actually went out and counter-protested. I think since this has happened here in Ontario, it's a hospital you know very well and done a lot of work with. We're looking for your comment on this.
Well, I think it's absolutely terrible. The federal government came out with a law that you cannot protest on hospitals. Folks.
And again, that was actually because of anti-vaxxers preventing people from getting into hospitals when they were, wanting to say that we shouldn't have to wear masks and that COVID was made up and all that sort of stuff. And there were actual anti-vaxxers blocking the entrances to hospitals.
Get some decency, have common sense. These hospitals are there to save lives. Mount Sinai did everything they could to save my brother's life. He was in there, and they're an incredible hospital, along with all the hospitals around the province. They're there to help people. Do not break the law, because that's exactly what happened. You broke the law, and
So according to Doug Ford, these protesters broke the law. You just heard him. That's what he's saying, that they broke the law. That's how rambunctious and horrible these protesters are. By targeting this hospital, they broke the law.
The federal government came out with a law saying you cannot protest in front of hospitals. But even without the law, you have to have an ounce of decency not to do this. I don't care what you're protesting. That doesn't matter. You want to protest? Go to City Hall, come down to Queen's Park, jump up and down, do whatever you want. But don't prohibit people going into a hospital when they're in there saving people's lives, because you never know. You may be the next person in that hospital and they'll be trying to save your life.
Not if Doug Ford keeps on defunding healthcare. Dark joke, dark times.
They're sacred hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah, the hospitals that you can go to that still have an open ER. So that was the leader of the province, the premier of the province. Well, Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP, also had something to say. Now, remember earlier in the show, I showed you that short clip of a NDP MP speaking out strongly against what's happening in Rafah and the fact that we've stopped funding UNRWA and stuff. You know, there's been several NDP MPs who have spoken out strongly against what the federal government is doing, how horrible it is. Okay? So at least in that party, they have people publicly saying it, whereas in the Liberals, apparently they're saying it behind closed doors. But let's see how much the leadership of the party reflects what the party is saying. Yesterday, the Mount Sinai Hospital was targeted because of its ties to the Jewish community in Toronto. This is not okay. Hospitals are a place for healing, not a target for protests. So here's Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP, saying Mount Sinai Hospital, again, was targeted because it's Jewish. And of course, the beloved Justin Trudeau. The demonstration at Mount Sinai Hospital yesterday was reprehensible. Hospitals are places for treatment and care, not protests and intimidation. I strongly condemn this display of anti-Semitism in Toronto and across Canada. We stand with Jewish communities against this hate. Are you fucking kidding me? Okay, there was a huge protest and rally happening, but it was not targeting the hospital. They were literally just walking by the hospital. It was on the route, and it wasn't the only hospital on that route. Okay, they weren't preventing anyone from getting in there. They weren't going in there. They weren't infiltrating it. They weren't intimidating the doctors and the patients in there. That is all 100% lies coming from our leaders. And if you were just to read that, how can you not think that this hospital was targeted by this rowdy crowd? You know, they say, oh, somebody climbed up on the scaffolding. We'll get to him in a moment, but apparently he's like Spider-Man for Palestine, and he was climbing up everything he could on the route. It was on the route from the Israeli consulate to the U.S. consulate, a pre-approved route. They were not stopping there. They were not targeting that hospital. And yet the leaders of our country, of our parties, blatantly lied. All of those tweets are live. None of them have taken them down. None of them have sent out a correction. Those tweets are there right now still, even though there's been a lot of pushback in the community because that hospital was not targeted by these protesters. How can we have any trust in our institution if this is what they're doing? How can we have any trust in anything they tell us if they are so blatantly lying about this? But not only are they lying, they're actually setting up an environment of fear. They never once mentioned why these protesters were protesting. They never mentioned that there was, a bombing campaign happening in Rafah and that people were protesting against that. They never mentioned that. They were just mentioning, oh no, it's all these anti-Semitic people that just hate Jewish people targeting this hospital. That's all it was. There was nothing more to that story. But, they know Israel is under attack from Hamas, and so they're targeting this hospital. Absolutely disgusting from our leaders. And it makes me question everything they have told us. How can we be sure of anything they ever tell us if they're being truthful when it is such a blatant lie? No corrections. It's still up there. I screen grabbed those tweets because I thought maybe they would take it down once the information got out. But no, they're still there. Days after the event, they're still there. Headlines are still spreading misinformation about what happened, which demonizes anyone standing up for Palestinian rights. That's all this is doing. There's this article here from The Grind that went step by step what happened out there. So what happened outside Mount Sinai Hospital as pro-Palestine rally passed by. And a 21-second clip from a nearly 4-hour rally became national news. Here we piece together what happened at the rally and afterwards. Yeah, basically, there was just this clip going around, a 21-second clip of everything that showed somebody up on the scaffolding waving a Palestinian flag. This guy here. You notice how he's dressed? He's dressed up kind of like Spider-Man, and he's kind of known for doing this. And he climbed everything he could climb on the route, not just the hospital. But this is the only thing the media seems to be focusing on. Yeah, Spider-Man's flag waving. At most pro-Palestinian rallies I've been to, some participants get up high to wave the Palestinian flag from visible vantage points. Sometimes these are relatively low, such as on a mailbox or a construction scaffolding, and sometimes they are higher, like on a bridge overpass, on top of a building, or harder to access spots. That's all it was. You can see him climbing on lots of different things on that route. Outside the hospital, as the protests began heading south along University Ave, it was only taking up the southbound lane of traffic. Cars heading northbound were still moving, some very fast, and protesters were occasionally in some lanes of the northbound side. I remember worrying that somebody could get hit by an oncoming car. At the intersection of University Ave and Gerrard Street, across from Mount Sinai Hospital, a number of participants moved into the left northbound lane to stop traffic moving that way. The protest had stopped traffic both ways previously on Yonge Street and College Street, as protests often do. Police moved in to stop protesters from blocking the intersection at Gerrard Street, seemingly intent on allowing cars to turn right and leave University Ave through there. There was a brief standoff and pause, and then the rally's marshals moved the crowd out of the intersection. This is around the time when the 21-second video was taken of the person in the Spider-Man costume climbing up the hospital entrance. The subsection of the crowd visible in the video is hardly moving forward, which is something people have pointed to as evidence that the hospital was targeted. Yeah, when these marches happen and you're on a road and stuff, because I've been in some of them, when the light's red, they stop. You know, there's times when they stop. However, there was no announcement made by the organizers that the rally was stopping intentionally at Mount Sinai Hospital, and the crowd left the area within about 15 or 20 minutes of arriving there. So they basically walked past it. They didn't go in. They didn't intimidate people. They didn't infiltrate anyone. Fuck. I'm reading from this article. The grind. I'll show you those pictures again. The Spider-Man. See, look at that costume. Definitely because he's targeting a Jewish hospital. Top of the Eden Centers, those were the other places he stopped at on the way. Sorry. One of these days, I'm going to get it right to make sure that you guys are actually seeing the things that I'm reading from as I'm reading them. So, the area within about 15 to 20 minutes of arriving there. So in other words, they walked past the hospital. That's all they did. This is about as long as the crowd stayed at other intersections. It was definitely a shorter stay than at the intersections where it had started and where it would end. The total duration of the rally was a bit over 3.5 hours. There is a federal law, C-3, which deems an offense for anyone who intentionally obstructs or interferes with another person's lawful access to a place which health services are provided by a health professional. As far as I saw while I was passing the hospital, the entranceway was clear and no one was stopped from entering or exiting the building. Other than vague mentions, I found no specific evidence that people were prevented from entering or exiting the building. So, we have all these politicians blatantly lying, and we have some people were pushing back. Sarah Jama. I want her to be president of Canada. She is amazing. Used to be part of the NDP, was kicked out of caucus for saying there should be a ceasefire. And yet, Selena Robinson, who referred to, Israel as the Palestinians where they were living as a crappy piece of land, and that, they weren't doing anything there. Oh, sure, there was a few 100,000 people, but it was a nothing land, and it was given to, the Jewish people. She still has her job within the NDP. No problems there. So Sarah Jama, who is an independent MPP here in Ontario, said in response to Justin Trudeau's tweet, which again is still live, "This is bonkers. I was there last night and that's not what happened. People are doing all they can to get you to stop sending weapons to Israel in our names. You've shown no leadership in over 1 million Palestinians being ethnically cleansed. Stop tweeting. Do something useful." And because Sarah, an outspoken Black woman, Muslim, living with disabilities, young, because she tends to speak her mind, there's certain media that likes to do things like this to her. Hamilton MPP calls PM protest condemnation bonkers. Hamilton Centre MPP Sarah Jama lashed out at Premier Justin Trudeau for declaring a pro-Palestinian rally outside a Toronto hospital to be anti-Semitic. The protest, which Jama says she attended, is under police investigation. Funny how they would, put this protest under police investigation, but not like all the right-wing rallies that tend to happen. The Monday protest started at the Israeli consulate in Toronto in opposition to Israel's continued attacks in Gaza that have killed thousands of civilians. At least they acknowledged that, but they could have said tens of thousands. It later moved to Mount Sinai Hospital, which was founded by the Jewish community. There, protesters chanted, and a few of them climbed up on the building and waved Palestinian flags. But that's the thing. It didn't move to Mount Sinai Hospital. It moved past the hospital. It moved past it. The hospital was on the move. They weren't going to the hospital. The protests drew condemnation from political leaders, including Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Trudeau, who posted statements, blah, blah, blah. The conflict in Gaza has become a focus for Jama, whose commentary on the conflict resulted her in being removed from the Ontario NDP caucus. Ford's Progressive Conservative Party passed a censure motion that means Jama cannot speak in the legislature unless she apologizes, which as far as I know, she still hasn't. Jama says she won't apologize and has threatened to sue Ford for libel and fight the censure in court. Not mentioning what that... It's funny how the magazine, the spec here, the Hamilton spec, leaves out why she is suing Doug Ford. Because he accused her publicly on Twitter, I believe the tweet is still there, of supporting the rape and murder of innocent women and children. That is libel. And that is why she is suing him. More than 28,000 people have been killed in Gaza since Israel launched its offensive, according to Health Ministry in Gaza. At least they acknowledge that. Last month, the International Court of Justice orders Israel to take immediate steps to prevent a genocide in Gaza and allow humanitarian aid into the region. So at least they do mention that, but the idea that Sarah Jama lashed out, the Prime Minister lashed out. So she had something to say to that too. Lashed out at the PM. The unnecessary use of this picture, instead of focusing on my legislative work and announcements released today, Grant Rants continue to put out borderline obsessive sensationalist hit pieces. This guy has done at least 3 or 4 hit pieces. Grant, don't ever contact me again. I will speak to others at your paper, but you may want to try actually interviewing Palestinians if you are an investigative reporter. The protest wasn't at the hospital. Went by the hospital. And other people speaking out. Why are you only talking about Mount Sinai when protesters were on around so many other buildings? For example, H&M, like the video below. The aim is clearly to criminalize pro-Palestinian solidarity while Canada arms Israel. Baseless anti-Semitism claims during a genocide. And that was the Fox responding to Justin Trudeau's tweet. Of course, the CBC Pitchbot had to get into here. So, new anti-Semitic Spider-Man demonstrator caught violently punching member of Jewish community. The Spider-Man known to climb buildings at pro-Palestine protests. Such indecency, so reprehensible, so anti-Semitic. But I like the CBC pitch bot. That's pretty much how our leaders would probably phrase that. Agent NDN responding to Bonnie Crumbies, saying she's torn up by this. The liberal Zionists don't clutch their pearls at all when Israelis literally went into hospitals and murdered Palestinian patients, but a Spider-Man cosplay guy stops to wave a flag at a hospital like every other stop along the way, and they've gone into full-on Hasbara mode. No mention of what's been happening at the hospitals in Gaza that are under attack, the last working one. Heartbreaking interview on the Majority Report talking about this. A doctor that was there just describing the situation. And like the next day, a couple days after that interview, the hospital was being bombed. No mention of that, but protesters walking by a hospital here in Canada. Oh no, the horror. From Beeson, there was no demonstration at Mount Sinai. The march went past 3 different hospitals. This man is lying about a protest that he knows was demanding he act to stop the genocide. And this motherfucker has the gall to call Palestinians reprehensible? When I say I am livid. He's the one that's spending, that sold $28 million worth of sent $28 million worth of weaponry to Israel since October 7th. That is being used in this genocide. He's not once mentioned anything about the hospitals being bombed in Gaza. He hasn't said anything about, he hasn't called out the Israeli government for what they're doing. He's always on about, Hamas, October 7th. But he's never actually said, you know what, this bombing you're doing, civilians and stuff, really bad. He's never done that. But people walking past a hospital, he has to call them reprehensible. Babies were left to die in incubators in a hospital in Gaza. He didn't say anything about that. But nope, Spider-Man climbed the wall at Mount Sinai Hospital. Reprehensible. So from Samira, I filmed the march. Here's the same guy climbing the Eaton Center and a pole at Charles Street. He climbed every scaffolding and building he could. Sinai was not treated any differently. This din of absurdity is framing this Galen as anti-Semitic is both churlish and dangerous. And more from Samira, I documented this protest, began at the Israeli consulate and went to the U.S. consulate. At every bed of scaffolding, some protesters climbed and waved Palestinian flags. Mount Sinai also had scaffolding that was climbed. It was treated no different than any other building on the route. Our politicians are lying to us. And it is kind of odd that when they're in the House, they're not even allowed to accuse another member of lying. Because, oh no, the decorum. But they're allowed to openly and freely lie to the people. How can we have any faith in our government if this is what they're doing? If they're allowing this, if they're aiding and abetting this genocide while calling out anyone who dares say anything like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be sending these weapons. Maybe we should be calling for an actual ceasefire. Maybe we should stop funding Israel instead of stopping to fund UNRWA. Just absolutely. These politicians. How can we trust them? How? When they're so far up their own asses. Like, it is just to so blatantly lie, to have those tweets still live. They have to know. In fact, they probably knew when they were sending out those tweets what the truth was. I have no doubt some of them knew. And yet they still tweeted that. They still, tried to demonize the pro-Palestinian parade. Tried to label them as anti-Semitic, as targeting this hospital, when that wasn't the case at all. They lied to us. And this isn't the only time. We're just, again, I'm questioning like all of my Canadian history that I've ever had. You know, anything that I've ever learned about this country. How can I know it's true? How can I trust the word of any politician? Anything they say, even if it's something, again, this is almost why I can't even blame anti-vaxxers because the government, said that we should get the vaccines and that it was safe and that we should be wearing masks. So that's something that's supposed to benefit people. But if they're lying so blatantly about this, then why not? Then what can you say? Like, how can you prove they're not lying about, you should take the vaccine? So even when it comes to things that are in your benefit, how can we trust that the government is actually being truthful? Like, what are we supposed to do with this government? Because if all you saw were those first tweets about all those leaders calling out this, you would think that the hospital was targeted. If you have the naivete of just believing what a politician says, that what they tweet out, what's on the public record, that you believe that, then you would believe that the hospital was targeted because it was Jewish by pro-Palestinian Hamas supporters.